All right, so we're going to continue. Now, one of the things that, let me go back here. One of the things that we were talking about last time was James the First, and he was King of England from 1603 to 1625. And one of the things that you may know about him actually is that when they talk about the King James Version of the Bible, it was written during this time. And so he died in 1625, was not a very popular, well, let me just say that he's not considered one of the great kings of England. And I also told you about his persecution of the Presbyterians in Scotland. And one of the reasons, of course, was because they were Calvinist and believed very strongly in the priesthood of all believers, that doctrine. And of course, if you can select or choose your religious leaders, then you can also choose your political leaders. And of course, this is, again, what we see around the world today is issues with economic issues, religious issues, political issues. So it's not like things have changed a whole lot. And when we talk about what was going on in England at that time, and we go through what was happening in Europe in the 16 and 1700s, you want to kind of compare that to what's going on in Southwest Asia today, or what is normally called or commonly called the Middle East. And you will find a lot of similarities. Now, as bad as James the First was, in 1625, Charles the First took over, and he was awful. He died in 1649, and we will get to that in a little while. But Charles the First was involved in several stupid wars, for example, with Spain, in which they actually invaded Spain. And in the southern part of Spain, it's kind of like, if you notice, it's not far from Africa, and they walked across the desert, and they almost all died of thirst. And they found a small town, and they raided the wine cellars and drank all the wine, got drunk, and were slaughtered. He also went to war in France for stupid reasons, and they were all pretty much slaughtered there as well. They invaded the port city of La Rochelle. La Rochelle is a beautiful city. It's got these nice castles, and when they went to put the ladders up to climb, they went about this far, and suddenly they just poured hot oil onto the people climbing the ladders. It's pretty awful. And there was so much discontent in England at that time that we actually had from 1642 to 1646 a civil war. This is known as the English Civil War, and of course there was a lot of religious background, economic, all those things that we talked about, political, religious, economic reasons that there was the war. The people that were loyal, I mean, and it was basically kind of between people that were loyal to the king and people that were loyal to the parliament. And it's not like, the king wasn't very good, but wasn't like the people in parliament were that great either. All right, so Charles I wasn't that great, but wasn't like everybody in the parliament was awesome. And so the people that supported the king were called the Cavaliers, and the people that supported the parliament were called the Roundheads. Okay, so that's something that you kind of want to remember. In fact, I think it's maybe the University of Virginia, I think are called the Cavaliers. They say that there's a lot of people in Virginia that are descendants of the people that kind of fought for the king during the Civil War, and many of them fled because Guess what? The Cavaliers and the king lost. Yes, that is right. In fact, in 1649, Charles I was executed. Executed. That's right. Executed. And of course, he could not understand why he was executed. He was executed for treason. But how, he said, how does this happen? How does this happen? Because how can you commit treason against yourself? Now, in a way, he had a point if he had been an absolute monarch, like in France. Now, of course, the absolute monarchs in France eventually sort of, you know what happened to them in the 1690s. They also get executed. We'll talk about that later on. And so there was a period of time from 1649 to 1660 where there was no king in England. No king in England. And who took over was this fellow, a guy by the name of Oliver Cromwell, and kind of, he was known as the Lord Protector. And really, you could say, you could call this a military dictatorship. Now, again, I mean, if you keep up with the news, look at what's going on in Egypt. There was a revolution. Then they had a vote. However, the person that was voted in as as a president, people didn't like him. There was unrest, and then the military took over. Okay, so obviously a lot more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell. Again, it's kind of very similar if you think about it. Well, he was very oppressive, and he died in 1658. People actually disliked him even more than the kings, and there was this kind of overwhelming desire to kind of bring back the monarchy. And so Charles II, who had been exiled, he was chilling out over there in France. He came back, and he was the king from 1660 to 1685. He died of, I'm not really sure what he died of. He just kind of fainted. He wasn't a bad king, actually. I mean, look, when I say that, it's not like he was a real good guy, and treated everybody great and that type of thing. Was probably a little bit more tolerant, was more tolerant than Oliver Cromwell and some of the previous monarchs in terms of religion, things like that. He even had Catholic sympathies, and some people say that he converted to Catholicism on his deathbed. Now, what did he die from? He had like a series of fainting spells. I mean, maybe his sugar was low. I mean, who knows? And of course, what they used to do back then is they would suck the blood out of your body using leeches. Okay, so they put like little leeches on him. No leeches. Obviously he's not on his clothes, but anyway. So this is probably the worst thing that you can do. And then they made like this kind of soup made from really from kind of like the broth that they made a broth out of from a human skull, and forced it down his throat. All right, so they forced it down his throat. All right, so he's like, no, 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 okay. So that wasn't good. Then they put snuff. See, they don't do that too much anymore, but they used to make tobacco real fine, and people would sniff it. And so they forced snuff up his nose. And so he kind of came to, and then he died. All right. But he was, in all the 1600s, he was probably the best king there was. All right. And so he used to get up every morning and jump into the Thames. The Thames River, which goes through London. Okay. So after that, his I didn't put it on there, but James II takes over, and he actually, his wife was Catholic, and I'm not sure if James wasn't Catholic himself, or he was very um, sympathetic to Catholicism, or he's kind of one of those things. Kind of went. I think he may have actually been Catholic, and he and his wife had an heir, had a little boy, and the English people were afraid that he would have been raised Catholic. His wife was Catholic. James II's wife was Catholic. And so the English people and many people in Parliament, even though you might have had kind of a fight often throughout the 1600s, between the Anglicans and the kind of other Protestants. Okay, when I say other Protestants, I mean the Anglicans were Protestant, but they weren't like Calvinist. So of course you had the Puritans, for example, and the Separatists, many of whom came to North America. And you had, the Presbyterians, all right? But the Anglicans, again, they were Protestant, but then they were kind of, more like Catholics. And so even though they had their fights with each other, they were all pretty much equally, against the Catholics. Okay, and so this allowed them to kind of unify, and they pretty much told James II, look, you've got to go, all right? And they invited Mary, who was married to William of Orange, Prince of the Netherlands. This is Mary. Now, she was the daughter of James II and his first wife, and she was Protestant. And they invited them over. They came over with their army. James II fled to France, and they became the king and queen. Now, this occurred in 1689 and is known as the Glorious Revolution. And the reason that it was known as the Glorious Revolution is for two reasons, mainly two reasons. Because it was a bloodless revolution. Nobody was killed. That's always nice. But also because they agreed to adhere to a Bill of Rights. Okay, a Bill of Rights. Now, this Bill of Rights did not protect the rights of everyone, mainly just the privileged in England, but it was a start. And again, this is really kind of the cornerstone of our Constitution. And when you think about that, what the Bill of Rights does is it's written down, and it's rights that are guaranteed to us. Okay, the rights that are guaranteed to us. All right, it sort of, one way you can look at it is it limits the power of the government. In this case, of course, it was the monarchs. And what's interesting is that, again, in England, you had a limited monarchy. But yet today you still have a monarchy, where in France you do not. So the fact that it was sort of limited sort of allowed it to continue on. There's sort of some type of compromise, even though the monarchs in England today are just really sort of monarchs in name. They don't really have they have some influence, but not a whole lot of influence in the government. But some influence. So this is, very famous and something that you definitely need to know and read about on the internet, and also if you have your textbook. And if you don't have a textbook, I know I said that you didn't absolutely have to have it. It probably is a good idea, if you can afford it, to get it. Like I said, I hate to tell students sometimes to get the textbook if you're like really strapped for money, and I know how that is, because you can kind of get by without it. All right, but it's also a good idea to get it. Okay, if you can. And that's about it. I just kind of wanted to go over that real quickly, and that'll be enough for this weekend. And I will see you next week.